our first guest.
Greetings. Tim Madigan and I have known each other on and off for 30 years. We worked at the Star Telegram together, and I had the opportunity this summer to hear him speak at a SBJ conference. And he spoke with such passion and conviction about an issue that's we're dealing with on campus right now. I thought he would make an excellent speaker for Free Speech Week to talk about some of his reporting at the Star Telegram. I made copies of the articles that he wrote about the Tarrant County District Attorney's sexual harassment case and how sex offenses are treated by the Tarrant County criminal court system here for you guys to take. If you want to read more, you can go to the library A to Z database, go to Newsbank, go to Star Telegram, and then search for his byline where you'll find, not that anybody's counting, 1,181 of them. Tim is also the author of 4 books, one about the siege in Waco with the Branch Davidians 15 years ago, 20 years ago this year, right? Yep. A book about the Tulsa race riots back in the 1920s. A just published collection of his journal. I think this is all journalism, isn't it? A Life Among Humans. I love the title. And his book, I'm Proud of You, My Friendship with Fred Rogers. Mr. Rogers, of public television fame, has been optioned for and is on the verge of casting as a movie. So Mr. Madigan's going to get acquainted with the world of Hollywood. But Tim, thank you so much for coming. And you guys, if you want these articles, they're here for you to take. And let's welcome Mr. Madigan to Tarleton State University.
Good morning, good afternoon. Really appreciate Dan asking me to do this. It's great to have an excuse to play hooky from the newspaper. Take a beautiful drive down here and be on this campus. I mean, this is really my first time on the campus of Tarleton, and I'm really impressed by what's going on here. You can tell that there's a lot of life and a lot of vitality, and that this place is really a special place. So you guys are lucky to be here. I've been, as Dan said, I've been at the Star Telegram since 1984, and been out of college since 1980. And my deal as a journalist was never really to work as an investigative reporter. The reason I got into the business was that I wanted to write a great American novel, and I wanted to be a writer with a capital W, whatever that means, and to tell stories and all this stuff. And so I was really about it, and that has been kind of the emphasis of my career, is learning how to write and learning how to tell stories. I read fiction, you know, learning craft, learning that, you know, narrative nonfiction is what I've tried to do over the years. So I haven't been an investigative reporter per se. You cannot have done what I do for as long as I've done it without some of that kind of crossing your plate. Dan, on the other hand, is one of the nation's premier investigative reporters. And he was, you know, and so you're very lucky to have him here. Because you know, you get one of the best to tell you how to do this. Now, we both had to learn, you know, kind of the new age of digital stuff. We had to learn how to disseminate. We had to learn how to semi-master new ways of disseminating what we do. And you know, witness hashtag free speech. But the basic process of gathering it and writing it is still essential. You have to have something decent to tweet, right? You have to have something decent to link to on your Facebook page. There has to be something of substance. Our democracy depends on it. I absolutely believe that. When I was talking to some of the kids, in the office today, and 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I started to despair that the death of the printed newspaper was going to mean the death of journalism as we knew it, and that clearly is not the case. Long-form journalism, investigative journalism survives and will thrive. We've had to make this transition. I think we're well on our way, and I think that the students in this classroom are going to be on the vanguard of that. It's going to be very, very important for you guys to kind of pick up the mantle and into this new age and take all the old skills of investigation and writing and transfer it into the digital age. So politicians, law enforcement, people in power know that there's somebody looking over their shoulder. It has to be. Now, the way this project started, and again, I'm not investigating for it. Come on in. The way this project started was I had finished, and I do generally do long form stories that I take sometimes a month, sometimes two, to do all the reporting, do all the writing, a lot of 2 or 3 or 4 part series that I've done. Well, I guess it was early last year. I finished a project. I had a very good editor named Lois Norder. We were looking for a new one. Kind of rooting around, I'd made some calls. Nothing was really clicking. And she says to me one day, "Why don't we write about rape? We never write about rape. As a come on in. Because rape as an individual crime rarely rises to the level that we're going to write about it, in the daily newspaper, right? So she says, why don't you just start making some calls and see what's current on that topic? Because obviously we can all agree that it's an important one. We never write about it. Why don't you just see what's out there? So I started making some calls to national types, right? Rape and Incest National Network, I think, is one place I contacted. And these other academics. And so here's what I started to hear. Here's what was current and quote unquote current and interesting with regards to the topic of rape. As opposed to a generation ago or 25 years ago, it seems like the world has come to a consensus that stranger rape is a bad thing, right? That the victim is no longer really stigmatized as they were 25 or 30 years ago. It used to be, even if it was a stranger rape, it used to be the first question would be, how was the woman dressed? Right? Was her jogging attire too skimpy? Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore. If someone jumps out of the bushes and grabs you and sexually assaults you, everybody can admit that it's not the woman's fault, and that guy deserves to go to prison for a long, long time. Right? So that is pretty much, in terms of issues, what was really current and interesting to the people who study it is the whole question of what is most generally known as date rape. But the people who are in this line of work hate that term. Because what it denotes is kind of rape light. Not something not as serious as stranger rape. Right? I hate that term. So if you're talking to one of these people, what they will call it is acquaintance rape. Or one person knows another. And the thing about it is that this is where, this is the issue. I forget the stats, but 80 to 90% of all sexual assaults involve a situation where the perpetrator and the victim knew each other, right? Often in a quote-unquote date situation. You know, but here's the deal, is that we have all these cases, and there's just a tiny fraction of them. You know, your paper reported one in four young women are sexually assaulted. But how many of those would ever report it? How many of those cases are ever reported? A tiny fraction. And as you also reported, you know, from what I've read of the first person account written by a young woman here on campus, here's why. First thing is, you know, so often the victim blames herself. If I wouldn't have had that much drink, if I wouldn't have been wearing what I was wearing, if I wouldn't have been in that place. You know, and the other part of it is who's going to believe me? Because it's going to be his word against mine. Right? And these cases are very, very difficult to investigate and very, very difficult to prove. And so the experts are trying to kind of get their arms around this whole notion of acquaintance rape and trying to destigmatize that the same way they destigmatized stranger rape 25 years ago. How do you investigate it? Well, here's the other thing that I found was really chilling. Maybe the most interesting part of the whole thing was that date rape, the classic kind of stereotype of the date rapist is a college boy who had too much to drink, and there was quote-unquote misunderstanding. That she said no, and he thought maybe, and blah, you know, it really wasn't. But here's what the research shows. That date rapes are committed, 90% of date rapes are committed by people who do it again and again and again. But these people are not your classic drunken frat boy. What they are is serial predators. They know at some level that they can go out with impunity, find the drunkest girl in the bar, take her home, do what they want to do with them, knowing that, you know, even if she does report it, in the unlikely event she does report it, it's going to be his word against hers. And they do it again and again and again and again. The average one, you know, according to the research, between 5 and 10 times each. The other part of the coin is the trauma suffered by the victim is as profound as if it were a stranger rape. Because the other part of the deal is that in addition to everything else, there's been a horrendous violation of trust. So you've got serial predators and traumatized women, mostly women, I suppose sometimes it's men. You know, and the toll in society is enormous. I covered a rape trial as part of my research. During voir dire, during jury selection, prosecutors asked the panel of 60 people, you know, okay, how many of you have either been sexually assaulted or know someone who was? 45 out of the 60 hands went up in the air. And so they went around the room asking people about the experience. Acquaintance rape, acquaintance rape, acquaintance rape, acquaintance rape, acquaintance rape, acquaintance rape, acquaintance rape. How many of those were reported? How much human suffering resulted? Do you think it's any less because it's not reported? So anyway, I learned. This is what I was learning. This is certainly interesting, right? I didn't really know where to go with this information. I didn't really know how to take it, the national information, and localize it to what was going on in Tarrant County. So this is what I did. And because the information is just, there's not a lot there, it's all fuzzy, and so this is what I did. And again, this might have been the first time that I've really done an FOI in my whole career. Because I just thought that you did an FOI and the authorities ignored it. Well, I found out that they can't. It's against the law to ignore an FOI. So anyway, I did it, and here's what I did. I asked for all the dispositions of cases involving all forms of sexual assault from all the cases that were accepted for prosecution by the Tarleton County DA's office over a 4 or 5 year period of time. Just trying to see, what happened to them, right? And so anyway, lo and behold, after whatever period of time is, I get all this data back, and it's on a computer disk, and it's on, and I figured out how to do an Excel spreadsheet, and so I basically plugged all this information into the spreadsheet. There were a lot of aggravated cases, stranger rape, cases where there's a weapon used, cases where, aggravated rape by definition is where there's a deadly weapon used or serious bodily injury. And those are pretty easy to prove, comparatively. If someone is putting a gun to your head or a knife to your throat, it's not a big leap to try to, prove that you were forced to have sex against your will. Or if you're beaten to crap, again. But so that's aggravated, set that out to the side. What I focused in on was the second degree sexual assault cases, because even though it's not, the comparison is not perfect, my theory was, and it was borne out in talking to all these national experts, in the sexual assault cases, these are the cases in which the victim and the perpetrator are going to know each other, right? Because there's no serious bodily injury, there's no weapon used. It stands to reason. Experts say, yes, that's a valid thing. Now these are the cases. So these are the cases, remember, okay, whatever the figure is, 1 out of every 10 victims report. That could be low, but it's something like that. So I'm a woman, or a woman who's been sexually assaulted by whoever in an acquaintance situation. I somehow decide to go to the hospital and report it. If you want to report a rape, the first place you go is to an emergency room. But they do a very kind of invasive rape examination. They assign you a rape crisis volunteer, and that's when the detective shows up to take your statement and start the investigation. We're talking about an acquaintance situation now. Now, most of the time, those cases, they're probably at least half of all those cases don't make it to the DA's office. Because the sex crimes detectives, and I've got to know them very well in Arlington and Fort Worth, they say, we believe you. We know that a woman wouldn't put themselves through this ordeal of a rape kit examination and all these questions from detectives unless it really happened, but we just can't prove it. We just can't prove it. So those cases go away. Those cases go away. What's left are the cases where the detectives believe that they have proved that an assault occurred beyond a reasonable doubt. They take it to the DA's office. DA's office accepts the case. The next step along the way is the grand jury. Presentation of the case to a grand jury to try to get an indictment. Now, there's a saying in the criminal justice system, a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutor told it to. Grand juries are very susceptible to the suggestion of the prosecution. I think the stats are something like maybe 5% of all criminal cases presented to grand juries are washed out or no bill of all crimes. right? So keep that figure in mind. So these second-degree sexual assault cases that have gone through a police investigation, and the police, these trained sex crimes detectives, believe they have proven their case, as difficult as it might be. Present it to the DA. Next step is grand jury. So I plug all this information into my Excel spreadsheet, press a button, and the stat comes out that more than half of all these sexual assault cases are being no-billed at grand jury, are being washed out at the grand jury. And when I saw that, I was furious. The day that I pressed that button and saw that number, I went to the Red Crisis Center in Tarrant County, and they had arranged for me to interview an acquaintance rape victim. And I sat across the table from this young woman and listened to her story, and I saw the human wreckage that this crime had created. And when it was over with, I went into the Rape Crisis Center's director's office and I said, how can this be? I'm furious. How can this be? And I talked to 3 or 4 of them, and I saw the same thing. It was just heartbreaking. Not the stranger jumping out of the bushes. Some dude at a party. Here's maybe the most important point I want to make to the journalism students in this room. There's a big deal made in journalism, and I might be contradicting everything Dan teaching you, but it's his fault because he invited me to speak. There's a big deal about objectivity in journalism, and what I say to that is bullshit. If you are a human being, you are not objective. You carry your own feelings, your own passions, your own experiences, your own this stuff. The deal about it is as trained journalists, that doesn't mean we're not human. As trained journalists, we're trained in ethics, we're trained in fairness, we're trained in accuracy, we're trained in thoroughness. There is a professional world of people who do what we do, who, despite our own unique way of looking at the world, have a framework, have a professional framework in which to do your job. But you do not check your humanity at the door. And investigative journalism particularly, because maybe Dan would agree, it's very difficult. And anytime I've done it, without my sense of outrage, I never could have finished the project, because 9 times, for every 10 phone calls you make, 9 are going to go nowhere. But I was furious about this. And I tell you what, and then here's the next deal. This is going to make the DA's office look really bad. Guess what? Don't care. Don't care. I met the PA we actually had an open house to open our new newspaper offices back and when I was just starting this deal. And he was there with one of his aides, and I met him for the first time, and I said, I'm doing this thing on acquaintance rape. Talked to some of the people, and it's a pretty intense situation. And this guy says, his name is Joe Shannon, he's a 71-year-old good old boy. He says, well, Tim, he says, here's what I think's going on in these cases. He said, I think that You know, what you got here is you got a young girl who's out someplace, too late, she's with someone she's not supposed to be with. She gets home, daddy's pissed, and the next thing you know, she's crying rape. And I went, are you kidding me? I mean, that is like stigma stereotype number one. And this is the guy who's in charge of the DA's office. I said, well, my response at the time was, well, I'm sure, Mr. Shannon, that your prosecutors are not going to be prosecuting cases that don't have merit, blah, blah, blah. And then I went over. That was before I learned the numbers. Once I learned the numbers, this all started to make sense. What the DA would do is they would take these cases into the grand jury, knowing that they're always hard to prove. There's this whole kind of investigative school that's starting to take shape now about how to investigate and prove these cases because they're very difficult to prove. The DA's office, you know, under Joe Shannon, would take these cases into the grand jury. Take these cases into the grand jury and essentially say something like this. And I've talked to grand jury members, so I know this is true. You know, it wouldn't break my heart if you no-billed this case. It wouldn't break my heart if you no-billed this case. So what's a grand jury going to do? The other thing that I learned was that, you know, once I found out this 51% number, I went back to the homicide or the sex crime detectives. And I said, what's up with this? And they said, well, we're not going to tell you, but as long as you figured it out on your own, this is what we've been dealing with. And then they start to tell me that they've taken cases up there with video of this crime happening and confessions from the guy who did it. And these cases are still being no-billed. And it's like, and these two, the head, you might, Cheryl Johnson, Tim Pinkney. Cheryl Johnson was for years the head of the sex crimes unit in Fort Worth PD. Tim Pinkney was the head of the sex crimes unit in Arlington PD. And they risked their job to talk to me. And basically lay it on the line. And the lead of the story is, you know, Tim Pinkney telling me this, or talking to me about this case where they had a confession in a video. And the case was no-billed. And then Pinkney said, we'd sure like to know why. Right? So I stay pissed off through this whole time. Every day I go in and talk to my editor about it. The other important part of this process in terms of the professional journalism part is you have to have a good editor. And I was fortunate to have one. And she kept saying, I agree that this is nuts, but she said we have to try to find the fatal flaw in your research. Because I guarantee you they're going to find it if we don't. So we went over the numbers, and I went over the numbers, and I went over the numbers, and went over the numbers over and over and over again until I realized that, you know, one time I thought that I made a mistake with the numbers. And it showed the numbers it's still being terrible, but not just out of this world terrible. And I heard, oh my God, I screwed up. I've already made this accusation against the DA's office, and the numbers aren't what. And then I went back over, you know, it was like one of the lowest days of my career, and then I went back over again and realized I was right. That they were that terrible. So then of course, the meeting with the DA. You know, Joe Shannon, 5 of his lawyers at one side of the table, me on the other. What do you got to say? Sat there for an hour and a half listening to their side. And one of the things that I got back to me after this series was published was, was it was fair. They got a chance to respond to every allegation, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. Also the result of good editing. It was fair, but, I had him. Caught him red-handed. And the thing about it is one of the biggest problems of this whole deal is that they did not understand the crime themselves. They were still operating under the Joe Shannon myth of little girl out someplace she's not supposed to be. And so, okay, we've got 20 cases. We've got 20 cases where there's confession and video. And so how are they going to explain that? Well, full disclosure, here are the cases. Confession and video. Give them to the DA's office. 2 days before the series was to publish, point by point, they say, here's what happened in this case, here's what happened in this case, here's what happened in this case, here's that. And most of the cases were the victim recanted. And so I'm going, So you're a victim. You've gone through a rape kit examination. You've gone through multiple interviews with the police. You've subjected yourself to God knows what by coming forward and reporting. But all of a sudden, you decided to change your mind in the DA's office. Why is that? So I called, by this time I had kind of a bevy of national experts. I said, what? And I said, because I had listened to the language that these prosecutors talked about these rape victims. By this time I'd had many conversations with them. And here's what was happening. Rape victim would be passed on from the police department to a sex crimes unit with trained detectives who know how to talk to these victims up to the DA's office. And the first question they'd get from the prosecutor would be something to this effect. Well, how drunk were you? And these women were saying, well, I know where this is going. See ya. And so I got this expert to say that. The other thing the detectives really ticked off about was they never got a chance to testify in grand jury. It was just a prosecutor going in and basically getting their version of events. And that is one of the things that's changed as a result of the story. The detectives have an opportunity to go in and, oh man, I've got to do another FOI to see what's changed. But is it okay to be angry when you're a journalist? Did you feel angry when you were in that story? Anybody disagree? I still feel angry. And one of the, I gotta tell you, I gotta be honest with you, one of the reasons why I haven't followed up is this was too hard. It was too hard. You're taking on powerful people. You're witnessing human suffering at this scale. You're seeing a system that's not working, and this is a scourge upon our land, and comparatively nothing is being done about it. And it wore me out. The day after, or within the next week, the newspaper allowed Joe Shannon an op-ed piece basically saying Tim Madigan's full of shit. But he didn't say why. You know I had him. He just said Tim Madigan's full of shit. Me. But he never called into question any of my methodology, any of my findings. Joe Shannon says, we care about women and Tim Madigan's full of shit. Then, our paper editorialized that Joe Shannon cares about women and Tim Madigan's bullshit. This is our paper. This is our paper. This isn't the DA's office. This is the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. At the end of the day, however, couldn't give a shit. The ones I cared about were the 4 rape victims sitting across the table from me. And you had told me today that you felt like you were giving a voice to people who wouldn't have it otherwise. And that is what this is all about. It takes courage. It takes skill, it takes perseverance. But at the end of the day, you guys got to carry the torch. Because what we do as journalists, when we're at our best, is we're giving voice to people, to the people who wouldn't have one otherwise. Even if you got to go sit down in front of the DA, or the congressman, or the mayor, or the president, it's got to be right. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be fair. It's got to be thorough. But at the end of the day, when you come across injustice, you have to be in their faces. Now, it's not my cup of tea. I also think that as journalists, we have as much of a responsibility to celebrate life as we do to expose wrongdoing. And I have no problem doing that. Fred Rogers used to say that one of the greatest challenges in life is to make goodness interesting. It's much sexier to write about DAs that are doing their job. And so, in this book, most of these stories, the villains are not here. Most of these stories are about good people who overcame real tough stuff in their life to do extraordinary things. That's how you make goodness interesting. It's not that people are good, it's that people are thrown into really horrific situations and somehow manage to rise above. Those are the stories I prefer to tell. But every once in a while, I find myself in the middle of this other thing. So I feel like I have the credibility. I'm going to tell good stories, but I tell you what, if you are hurting people and I know about it and I can do something about it, you do not want to be on the other side of the table from me. And I think that's the kind of attitude you need to have. Thoughts? What are you thinking? It is scary. But this goes on up, part of the deal about this story was that Tarrant County is typical. This is the norm rather than the exception. The people who are really treating these cases in a different, more kind of enlightened way are the vast minority. I mean, the stories are, there's stories all over the country, and the story yet to be told, and you started, the story yet to be told is how these cases are swept under the rug on college campuses. You know what happens, some of the stories I heard in my research were just chilling because it makes the college look really bad if this happens on their campus. Whether it happens here, I don't know. I imagine it does. It happens everywhere. But Dan, well, I won't go into that. I won't get him in trouble. Other thoughts?
Can I ask a question, kind of digressing from what you, I think it relates, I'm not a journalist. As one, you're probably well aware of this. 1 month from today is the anniversary of JFK's assassination. The city of Dallas has taken over Dealey Plaza and is not going to allow the public in there. It's a ticketed event, which all the tickets are already gone for. What I've read just in the last day or two is this also applies to journalists. They're picking the journalists. They don't want anybody who dissents from the Warren Commission, Oswald Act of the Loan Dip, and they're restricting freedom of speech there, are they not?
Sure sounds like it. I'd have to know more about the situation. And the thing about it is that I'm glad you're having Free Speech Week. I'm glad that the First Amendment exists. I'm glad that we have these shield laws and everything else. But I am not a First Amendment crusader. I'm a guy who kind of stumbles around, and every once in a while a story lands on my lap, and once it does, and if people are being hurt, then game on. But those battles are for someone else to fight. I'm about taking it down to we've got this kind of constitutional framework in place, taking it down to a human level. The individual journalist, the individual story. And what do you do? What is, because I would have thought, man, this is really unprofessional. 25 years ago, I thought it was really unprofessional to be so emotionally involved in this story. Because in journalism school, taught objectivity to the point of, and I tell you what, I think that the national media has done a horrible job in a lot of the reporting with regards to national politics. But that's not what it is at all. You still get to be a human being. And that's where I'm coming from. Use that passion. Be professional, but use that passion. Because you're gonna need it. It's hard work.
Sounds like it helps.
Well, of course, I know. Can you do what you do? He's won Pulitzers. Yeah, he did death row stuff. Maybe he's the exception. Maybe he was this totally dispassionate, objective journalist, but I suspect not. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's necessary.
There's a saying in newsrooms that it's management's obligation to beat the passion out of its reporters. And, it's great to see reporters like Tim that they can't beat the passion out of it. And, that outrage is, when you can channel it.
You gotta channel it though. You gotta be a professional. You gotta have a good editor. Sometimes you gotta pull back. But I'm at this point in my career where I'm gonna feel what I'm gonna feel. If you don't like it, you'll fire my ass. But I do think that giving you guys the benefit of my experience over the years is, you don't have to wait 30 years. And you can go out and be human right now, just like you were. Question?
Tim, twice in you guys' careers, yours and Dan's, there were issues that came up. I guess one was with the assistant city manager, or actually the city manager with Fort Worth, that later became, I think, a vice president of the Star Telegram, and the other one was actually the president publisher that was investigated for a serious crime. Was there pressure that came down on reporters? Are you aware of of any of that? What kind of, as far as free speech and, the people that were covering those stories?
I know the situation you're referring to, and I wasn't involved. I mean, the rumors were all over the newsroom, but I wasn't involved in that case specifically.
Well, there were two different ones that I'm thinking about, but both of them wound up being, or were pretty high-ranking people in the Star-Telegram, and, just the same sort of thing that's like with the DA's office, where he has that, if it's funneled down, what kind of pressure, and the rumors that were going around. The reporters, I think, did a pretty good job, as I remember, but, and what kind of pressure was on them?
Like I said, I think they tried to, because one of the deals about it is you depend on law enforcement sources for stuff like that, and I think that, and I don't know this for a fact, I don't know anything for a fact, but I suspect that this was handled at various levels in the law enforcement community based on pressure from other people in the community. I don't know what kind of pressure was brought to bear on them, but I will tell you another story. Let's see if I can summarize this real quickly. Back in the early 90s, I'd written a very kind of puffy piece about this minister in Fort Worth, the biggest United Methodist church in town, pastor to all the more powerful, wealthiest people in town. And after I wrote the story, it's called to my attention that, to make a long story short, this guy had been a serial sexual abuser over 30 years. The publisher was his best friend. The executive editor went to this guy's church, and I'm telling you, it was a very similar situation in terms of how I felt about it. And so it got to the point where I was taking on those people. It was just, to make a long story, I was taking on those people. And there was another editorial that was written by the publisher that called me out by name as being part of a conspiracy to bring down this wonderful, beautiful minister. And I went to my editor and said, I'm going home and tell my wife that I'm quitting. Because that same day, we had just published his first story. That same day, I got 35 phone calls from women who had been abused by this guy. And in the meantime, this editorial's coming out that's saying Tim Madigan is part of a conspiracy to bring down this guy. Well, I told my wife I'm gonna have to quit. Phone rings. It's the newspaper saying someone has convinced this guy not to run this editorial. But then that precipitated a long, a year and a half process of me investigating this minister with the senior editors of the paper against me. But again, anger will take you a long way. I didn't care. And by the end of the day, this guy was defrocked and sued for probably $20 million. But it's a very similar situation. But again, it's like, when your livelihood depends on it, how far are you willing to go?
We've got time for one more question, maybe.
What are you thinking in back?
I'm thinking about that recent PBS documentary on concussions in the NFL, The League of Denial. I'm thinking about the role that emotion played in those journalists in that broadcast. Is that why frontline documentaries are so compelling?
Right.
It's because they're not scared to hide their subjectivity. Right? They're putting emotion into the story rather than leaving it out. I mean, I think that emotion and objectivity sometimes, you can still be objective and have emotion, but sometimes we try to remove emotion completely from the equation.
You think you should?
I think that people do erroneously. We should capitalize on that anger, and it should come out in our pieces.
Well, if someone would interview me about this story, I would tell it to them just the way I told it to you. And the thing about it is that if they've got the goods, why not? Why not? Thanks for being an attentive audience. Thanks for indulging me, my rant, one more time. If any of you want a book, I'd be glad to sell it to you and autograph it. Autograph would be extra. They're $10 each. If not, that's great too. You're lucky to be here. This is a good place. And again, you know, you guys are carry the torch, so do it proudly and with courage, and hope to see you again sometime. Take care.
Yeah.